Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start the program. We have aircraft in the air. We've got 7 flyovers today. My paper and the flyovers, I don't know whether they're going to all coordinate or not. We're going to find out in the next 75 minutes. But what I would like to do at this point is, where do you go? Would like to ask you to stand for the posting of the colors. Stand if able. The colors are being posted by 5th Special Forces Group's color guard, and they'll be piped in by the pipes and drums of the Black Devils. Pipe band.
Out of the bridge, Rollins Green Bar is wedding. And cover, roll, up.
Color guard, post colors. Please remain standing if able for the singing of the national anthems of Canada and the United States. These anthems will be sung by Miss McKenna Sellers with the Helena Symphony. Overhead we'll have an aircraft coming over. It's the C-47. It's a similar plane that the force jumped out of 80 years ago. We'll have a U.S. and Canadian soldier free-falling to furl the flags, and we'll start the anthems as soon as they're in the air. And while we're waiting for them, I'll talk a little bit about what happened out here in 1942. The 1st Special Service Force arrived in terms of airborne training. They got 5 days and 2 jumps. And for those of you that are airborne trained, they were teaching them to jump with their feet apart. So you saw lots of ankles and legs broken out here over the course of a couple weeks until they realized we got to do something different. So they sent the film to Fort Benning, Georgia, and realized that feet apart doesn't work. So they went feet and knees together, and that's the way that they jump today. Like I said, the timing of aircraft doesn't always fit what I've got on paper, so I will just keep talking to you until we get aircraft. That was CK's orders. 80 years ago, 1942, world was at war. 1st Special Service Force was formulated, came out of England. England needed to buy time. Germany was occupying all of Europe, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill knew that there was going to, we got aircraft in the air? Your eyes are better than mine. They're coming. They're on the way. McKenna, I'll turn it over to you. the singing of the national anthems of Canada and the United States.
Right hand, attention.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I would now like to invite Chaplain Steve Barry to give our opening prayer. Chaplain Barry.
Join me, please. Eternal God, Lord of time and eternity, Lord of the living and the dead, you've made yourself known to us not only through your wondrous works in this creation, but also by your mighty works through the history of nations, from their birth to the present. From our earliest beginnings, you've guided us through times of adversity and prosperity, through periods of war and peace. By your own hand and on our behalf, you have shown yourself strong to save us. Among all the nations of the earth, America and Canada are richly blessed in remarkable and in extraordinary ways. We turn to you today to remember with highest esteem and devoted respect the storied service and sacrifices of the gallant men of the 1st Special Service Force who served in Italy and France during World War II as members of a Special Operations Strike Force, the likes of which the world has yet to see again. Christened the Black Devils, the Devil's Brigade, by their enemies, these valiant Canadians and Americans fought side by side, many of them dying together before the enemy's guns, flesh against steel, intermingled between life and death, where uncommon valor was a common virtue. Whether living or dead at hostility's end, none of these men would ever be the same. Many of those who died, died all alone, and the living, though surviving, would be forever changed. All of them, every one, drank deeply from the cup of sacrifice, even to its most bitter dregs, for the sake of future generations whom they themselves would never know. And today, as if unchanged by 80 years, through the retelling of their brave achievements, they rise again to stand before us full of vibrant life. May time in its passage neither dim nor tarnish the glory of their deeds or the sting of their loss. O great Physician, bind up our two nations' yet wounded hearts as we remember them and honor their sacrifices. Enable us to embrace fully the legacy of valor, duty, and sacrifice of those quiet heroes who have caused our flags to fly high and with honor. Compel and empower us to take up the light of liberty for which they have given all, so that on our watch it may remain undimmed. This is our hope, and therefore it is for this I pray. Amen.
It is now my honor to introduce these gentlemen on the review stand. On my left, your right, Brigadier General, representing U.S. Army Special Operations Command, Brigadier General Derek Lipson, Deputy Commander, 1st Special Forces Group, or Command, excuse me. I'm going to take this off. To his left, representing Montana National Guard, Brigadier General Jamie Wilkins, Director, Joint Staff, Montana National Guard, and Army Assistant to Commander, 11th Airborne Division. Representing Canadian Special Operations Forces Command, Lieutenant Colonel J.F. Furland, Acting Commander, Canadian Special Operations Regiment. Representing Canadian Special Operations Command, Chief Warrant Officer Scott Howell, Regimental Sergeant Major, Canadian Special Operations Regiment. Colonel Retired Stephen Berry, Chaplain, U.S. Army Chaplain Corps, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Max Carpenter, President, Special Forces Association, Chapter 28. And Mike Gawley, President, Canadian Special Operations Regiment Association. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'm going to If you watch overhead, we're going to have another jump. I can see them off to our northeast coming around. It'll be the C-47 again. While we're waiting for him to come around, let me talk a little bit about that first pass over. That first pass was by a P-40 World War II fighter plane. It was a Curtiss P-40. There were about 13,000 of those made between 1941 and 1944 that were produced for World War II. The C-47 that's coming around for the pass, we're going to have former SF, U.S. and Canadian SF soldiers jumping in on a static line jump. The jumps that the force did out here were static line. Like I say, this aircraft is very similar, and I'll finish my story about the aircraft. It's titled Miss Montana. It's one of the few C-47 that are still airworthy. What's ironic about it to Montana was that this was the C-47 that jumped the smoke jumpers into Man Gulch in 1949. And if you know the story of Man Gulch, of those smoke jumpers that jumped in, it was a tragedy in U.S. Forest Service history. The majority of those men, I think there was only 2 that survived that fire. But this is the same aircraft that brought them in. They're coming in right now. If you look off to your right, they're making their pass right now. I'll stop talking. And what you're seeing right now is a very common sight 80 years ago. In order to get all the men jump qualified, those aircraft were in the air pretty frequently. And trailing is the P-40. promise you he's coming back around. In the parachuting world, winds make all the difference in the world. They'll make that first pass, check the winds, because when those men go out, they don't want to wind up scattered all over the hills or wrapped up in a tent or wherever it may be. So to make those passes is a safety issue, safety concern, to make sure that they know what the winds are like when they go out, and that they will hopefully land on their targets on the ground. So I will keep talking. When they jumped here in 42, didn't have that technology. Like I said, 5 days and 2 jumps. If they went out of the aircraft, they moved on to the next training, next test. If they were still on the aircraft when it landed, they went back to the unit they came from. Colonel Frederick at the time was given 6 months from today, 1942, to have this unit combat ready. And when I think about the challenge that he had of bringing 2 armies together, different marching styles, different pay grades, that's still an issue today, different uniforms, different ranks, General Frederick was told, go forth and do good things, and he was given 6 months to have them ready. So when they jumped here in 42 in their non-steerable parachutes, they were at the full mercy of whatever winds were in the air. And there were jeeps and trucks scattered all over the horizon, gathering up those men because they were just at the mercy of the wind. This is a, what I'll call a high-risk event, in the sense that parachuting is a dangerous hobby. No, it's not a hobby, it's a career. And these men, having not jumped out of an aircraft, having their training be limited to being hoisted up in some harnesses and dropped so they could get the feel of hitting the ground. And we've got some videos, there's some videos of them jumping here, and at that time this was just a rock pile. And one of the things that we grow well in Montana is prickly pear cactus. And you only have to roll through that once or twice to appreciate, like these gentlemen did coming in, to try to do a stand-up landing, because once you roll through the prickly pear cactus, it's a couple days of being very uncomfortable. They're coming back around. They're coming back around. But anyway, back to the bird's eye. 30, 40, 50-mile ruck marches wasn't a big deal. They always did it with poles to develop their shoulders, their upper body. Original mission was going to include cross-country skiing. And so they were preparing the men to survive in the winter and be able to cross-country ski long distances. So when you see pictures of them on their ruck marches, the Canadians brought the shorts, which the U.S. enjoyed very much because it was a hot summer in July in Montana when they landed here. There was no housing here. Back where you're parking going east, they quickly threw up a bunch of 8x8 housing units, and that's what they lived in through the winter. He's coming in again for a second pass, so I'll quit talking. Jump. Colonel Frederick at the time, the insignias, let me talk about the insignias. The name service was added for deception. The insignias of the crossed arrows and the Indian patch, the spearhead patch, came from the Indian scouts from the wars in the 1800s. And the iconic V-42 knife, V for victory, 42 for the year, was designed by Colonel Frederick and his staff and produced by Case Knife. And those insignias and that knife are worn on Special Forces soldiers today. CH-47's coming in, so I'll step aside. Okay, I'll continue my history. So who are the men of the 1st Special Service Force? Their commander was at the time a lieutenant colonel at the War Department. He's a 1928 West Point graduate by the name of Robert T. Frederick. He was assigned the task of analyzing plow, determining whether it was feasible or not. At the time, the United States wasn't even in the war yet. This was all we're talking about 42, but when the concept came up, it was right before Pearl Harbor. So the United States hadn't even engaged in the war yet. Like I say, Lieutenant Colonel Frederick was tasked with analyzing PLOW. He was working under George C. Marshall, General George C. Marshall, and General Dwight D. Eisenhower. His report was a no-go. He estimated the survival rate at less than 10%. They were being trained to get into Norway. They were going to have to fight their own way out. Also at the time, there were no aircraft big enough to get them in. To bring an armada of aircraft in, Germany also had radar that was ahead of the rest of the world. They would have picked them up 1,000 miles away and known they were coming. So PLOW was given to the underground. But Colonel Frederick saw that there was something. Colonel Frederick, he was promoted to full colonel. They picked William Henry Harrison. Here comes the second bird coming around. They picked William Henry Harrison because it was available, it was similar terrain. We have pretty good winters out here to train in. And so they came out to Fort William Henry Harrison. 163rd Infantry Regiment was on the west coast doing coastal defense. So the post was available, and this post was selected to be the training site. I will stop again for the jumpers.
Nice they had a little bit of wind there.
One of the objectives is to land as close to the vehicle that you're riding out on as possible. So those that are way out there have got a little hike to get back in. Okay, Fort Harrison is picked. The commander, Colonel Frederick, is picked, chosen. Volunteers started arriving at Fort Harrison in early August 1942 from across the United States and Canada. That Chinook is going to climb up to 10,000 feet, and we're going to have a free fall jump in 9 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. You're missing a finger. 4 minutes?
1 minute?
I'll talk until I'll tell until I watch CK. Colonel Frederick was able to push these forcemen, these volunteers. They were looking for men that could survive the elements, that were rough and tumble. If you've seen the movie Devil's Brigade that was put out by Hollywood in 1968, the Americans took a little offense to that, the way they were portrayed. They were a rough and tumble bunch, but Colonel Frederick was the man to command them, and he was able to push them and get more out of them than probably anybody else, because he immediately integrated them into companies and regiments, battalions. There wasn't the Canadian and the U.S., it was all integrated. And when they were training, the competition between the two, the U.S. soldiers weren't going to be outdone by the Canadians, and the Canadians weren't going to be outdone by the U.S., and so they pushed themselves harder and harder as they trained. Off to my left, I was talking about what they called Muscle Mountain. That was a regular run up and down that hill, whether it was for conditioning or discipline, but they knew the top of that hill well. Toward the end of their training, the run up the hill was with 2 jerry cans of water, 2 5-gallon cans of water, 1 in each hand, to get up to the top of the hill. That was the condition they were in, and we're going to talk about that when we get to Italy. We talked about the first test being airborne. 5 days, 2 jumps. Norway was still the mission. They were trained to parachute in, but they had to figure out their own way out. Conditioning. When you talk to the veterans, they say conditioning and training were why they survived the war. 20, 30, 40, 50-mile ruck marches, no big deal. Hand-to-hand combat was their trademark. A former Irish policeman from Shanghai by the name of Pat O'Neill brought his own style of fighting to the force. It was a mixture of several fighting disciplines, and he told his men right up front, he's not training them to defend themselves, he's training them to be offensive. He taught the forcemen how to silently and quickly eliminate their opponents. He also taught them how to effectively use the V-42 knife. Other training including demolitions, mountaineering, navigation, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Night fighting, winter warfare and survival and weapon systems, both the U.S. and German. And their training on the German weapon systems saved them many times when they were operating, especially at Anzio, behind enemy lines, cut off from their supply lines. The Norway mission was given to the underground, and eventually they eliminated the plant. But Colonel Frederick, with the help of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, were able to keep the unit together, and they continued to train. Okay, I can hear them. I'm going to stop. They're coming out at 10,000 feet. And this will be a free fall jump. The other jumps were static line. Pass, I lost it. I don't think anybody came out. Okay, that was a pass. I'll keep talking. The winds at 10,000 feet are significantly different than they are on the ground. Are they out?
There, yeah.
Oh, there they are.
It's always a good job.
Although the 1st Special Service Force never made a combat jump, I think they would have enjoyed jumping in these chutes versus the non-steerable ones that they were handed. To the island of Amchitka, and were part of the invasion of Kiska on August 15th of 1943, only to find out that the Japanese had already left the island. They came back to the United States, got on troop trains, went back to the East Coast, boarded ships, and headed over to North Africa. A diversion, went across North Africa, up into Italy, landed in Italy in November of 1943. Their first mission was a mountain called La Defensa. The Allies were on the Italian boot, being commanded by Lieutenant General Mark Clark. They ran into what was called the Winter Line, which was a defensive line across the Italian boot. There were the German soldiers occupying all the mountaintops. They controlled everything that moved. The Allies had tried for 6 weeks to clear La Defensa with no success and high casualties. Colonel Frederick, in his unconventional thinking, decided that the best way to attack the mountain was from the north. Again, if you want to take a minute to look at Mount Helena, very similar to what they were looking at. Elevation was higher. Germans weren't defending the north cliffs because they didn't think anybody could get enough men and equipment up those cliffs to put up any kind of offensive. The conditioning and training that they received here at Fort Harrison proved the Germans wrong. On the night of December 2nd, 1943, 1st, 2nd, and about half a 3rd Company, 2nd Regiment, in fog and snow and rain, quietly made their way to the top of the mountain, going up the cliffs. The attack started at daybreak, and within 4 hours, the 1st Special Service Force had cleared the mountaintop. And for the next 6 weeks, the 1st Special Service Force cleared mountaintops across the winter line. When they went into combat on December 3rd, 1943, on La Defensa, their combat strength was 1,800 men. When the force was relieved 45 days later, fewer than 500 men got on the trucks. The force then moved to Anzio and was given the right flank, 12,000 meters. Their strength was back up to about 1,200 men. Colonel Frederick knew that he couldn't defend. If the Hermann Goring Division knew his strength, they would run over him. So he immediately set out patrols, night patrols, what they trained here in Helena for, and the utilization of the V-42 knife. It was at Anzio that they got the name the Black Devils. And for 99 days, the 1st Special Service Force raised havoc behind enemy lines. Those handouts that were given to you when you came in, on the front of that is a sticker, calling card, business card, whatever you want to call it. That was their psychological operations when they were operating behind enemy lines. In German, it reads, Das Decayende kommt noch. In English, it reads, the worst is yet to come. And they would leave that sticker everywhere they went, getting inside the Germans' heads. By the time the breakout came in May of 1943, they had pushed that German division back almost 4 miles. On June 4th, the breakout was to liberate Rome. On June 4th, 1944, 2 days before D-Day, the 1st Special Service Force was credited with being the first Allied unit to enter Rome, and it was a patrol of 1st Special Service Force men led by then Captain Mark Radcliffe. The force's final mission was Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France. Again, the force was the tip of the spear. Their mission was to clear artillery off of 2 islands so the main landing force could get through. Then the force went inland after clearing the islands and fought their way up the Mediterranean coast. They called it the Champagne Campaign. They're on the French Riviera. They fought their way up to the Franco-Italian border, and they were deactivated at Villeneuve-en-Aubier, France, on December 5th, 1944. In 251 days of combat, the 1st Special Service Force had 2,314 casualties, which was 134% of their combat strength. They captured 30,000 enemy soldiers. Their kill rate was 25-1, and they never failed a mission. The traditions and honors of the 1st Special Service Force are continued today by Special Operations of the United States and Canadian Armies. The forcemen volunteered to do the impossible, and today's Special Forces soldiers, as you've just seen, volunteer to see if they can meet the standards to be the best of the best. Technology, tactics, rules of engagement has all changed over the years, but the Special Forces soldier is still the Special Forces soldier, and they have the force's DNA. In 1952, the U.S. Army stood up 10th Special Forces Group, and in 1960, 1st Special Service Force was reconstituted 1st Special Forces. In 2006, Canada stood up Canadian Special Operations Regiment. They all have direct lineage to the 1st Special Service Force. And in the words of 1st Veteran Charlie Mann, he said, "We are honored that you remember who we were, but never forget why we were fighting." In closing, and this is pointed more to the Special Forces, some of you may have heard this, but I want to read a quote from James R. Ward. He was in the Office of Strategic Services, and he wrote this: "Men, Special Forces is a mistress. Your wives will envy her because she will have your hearts. Your wives will be jealous of her because of her power to pull you away. This mistress will show you things never before seen and experience things never before felt. She will love you, but only a little, seducing you to want more, to give more, to die for her. She will take you away from the ones you love, and they will hate her for it." Lieutenant Colonel Furlan is a graduate of Army Staff College and Canadian Joint Command and Staff Program. Lieutenant Colonel Furlan.
General Lipson, General Wilkins, members of the FSSF, Special Forces, CSOR Association, family and friends of our FSSF veterans, distinguished guests, good morning. The Canadian Special Operation Force Command, particularly the member of the Canadian Special Operation Regiment, are honored to participate in this prestigious event. The sacrifice given and accomplishment achieved by the forcemen continue to be remembered by and are an inspiration to today's men and women of the Canada Special Forces. 80 years ago, the Canadian Army called for volunteers to join the 1st Special Service Force. They were looking for young, strong, and robust men who had experience living off the land, preferably work with experience in the north as miner or lumberjacks. Preference was given to resilient, independent, self-reliant individuals who could undertake hard physical condition and endure harsh environments, and not only survive but thrive. Volunteers knew little about the formation they were about to join. It was sometimes described as a service with a foreign country, a new parachutist battalion, and even for some a suicide squad. In August 1942, selected volunteers were sent from their respective provinces by train. On arrival, the Canadian soldier were immediately mixed with their American counterpart down to his section level, sharing tents and rapidly getting to know one another. There were cultural differences, but they rapidly learned. The Americans learned not to cast slurs on royalty, and the Canadian learned not to call an American who lives south of the Mason-Dixon line a Yank. With little time to prepare, Colonel Frederick established the most challenging and rigorous training program known to any infantry unit in World War II. The difficulty and extent of this training are still considered exhausting and intense by modern standard. On the 5th of December 1944, after 5 operational deployments, 251 days of combat, more than 2,300 casualties, including 400 killed, having never failed a mission, the force had lived up to its promise of becoming one of the Army's elite, a tough, secret, widely trained outfit that fought its way through some of the hottest spots in World War II. In the end, the FSSF demonstrated that no task was too great and no mission too daunting, as the force was made of courage and determination. The Canadian Special Operations Force Command and Canadian Special Operations Regiments are proud to perpetuate the Battle of Honor of the 1st Special Service Force, including Monte la Defensa, Monte la Remetania, Monte Camino, Monte Maggio, Anzio, Rome, the Advance on Tiber, and southern France. With this honor comes great responsibility to live up to the deeds and legacy set by the forcemen. The motto of Caesar is Audemus, which translates to "let us dare." To this day, the bond that was built between the Canadian and the American forcemen is still baked into our DNA. Whichever theater of operation we go to, we rapidly build bond with our SF counterparts and work together extremely well towards a common purpose. The lineage and history of the SFSF goes beyond the SF community and the generation. RSM Howell and I, a couple weeks ago, had the privilege of attending Forceman Jack's interment. In our discussion with his son, his grandson, his extended family, and family friends, it became rapidly clear that the FSSF still held a special place in their daily life. On behalf of Major General Bovine, my commander, Chief Warrant Officer Grant, my command chief, RSM Chief Warrant Officer Howell, and myself, I'd like to thank the Special Forces Association, the Canadian Special Operations Regiment Association, and the 1st Special Service Force Association, as well as the family and friends of our SFSF veterans who endeavor to remember their glory and sacrifice. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Furley. Now I would like to ask Brigadier General Derek Lipson to say a few words. Brigadier General Lipson is currently serving as the Deputy Commanding General, 1st Special Forces Command. He graduated from Midland Lutheran College, Kansas State University, and United States Army War College. He was commissioned in May of 1990, and over the past 32 years has served in various commands.
Thanks, Bill. The history around this place is amazing, and so I was last here in 2013, and I ran from post up to the top of Mount Helena and back. That history is not going to be repeated. But good morning. On behalf of Lieutenant General Braga, U.S. Army Special Operations Commander, it's an honor to be here today to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the 1st Special Service Force. I would like to thank the 1st Special Service Force Association, the Canadian Special Operations Regimental Association, the Special Forces Association, Chapter 28, the Montana National Guard, Miss Montana, Heather Lee O'Keefe, Frederick Award recipients, distinguished guests, and most importantly, the Canadian and U.S. operators who carry on the legacy of this storied organization. Thank you to those of you who are hosting us, and thank you to those who defend these two great nations. The 1st Special Service Force is the true heritage of U.S. Army Special Operations Command. This was the U.S. Army's first truly dedicated irregular warfare element. Of the forcemen knew a specially trained, small element had the ability to create an outsized impact behind enemy lines. That is the idea that brought about the 1st Special Service Force. It is also the reason armed forces of Canada and the United States still require special operations soldiers who can go where others cannot do. We've heard, and I hope you all have an opportunity, if you haven't, visit the museum, see the different monuments that are around the town, that storied history. The history of the pioneering forcemen who convened here 8 decades ago. Today, I want to tell you what their courage and commitment created 80 years later. U.S. and Canadian Special Operations Forces carry forward the tradition. The insignia on our uniforms mirrors the iconic arrowhead of the 1st Special Dagger in the middle. And I'll just share that that's the most honored gift I ever received coming out of command, is the V-42. That and the iconic red of the Devil's Brigade. We have carried forward more than just the uniforms. From its inception as part of Operation Plow, the 1st Special Service Force was born to conduct dangerous missions against critical targets at overwhelming odds. Today is no different. The men and women of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command and the Canadian Special Operations Regiment volunteer, not only themselves, but their families and loved ones, for tough training, long deployments, unknown dangers, and unparalleled challenges. In this era of warfare, there is no safe haven. Our active forcemen before us, we trained in airborne operations, long-range infiltration, hand-to-hand combat, mountaineering, Arctic warfare, survival, and weapon systems. We are as comfortable at night as we are in the day. Our warriors are elite, the best. But what made the 1st Special Service Force so decisive in battle? What makes special operations different from our brothers and sisters in arms who are not soft? Similarly, our modern special operations operators must be expert problem solvers, capable of operating without guidance or support for months or even years in foreign and hostile lands. If they cannot meet the standard or match the legacy of the 1st Special Service Force, we send them back to their units. Those that remain are the greatest assets our nations have. Despite whole of government commitment to defeating democracy and threatening freedom, our adversaries fear us, as they should. We are the modern successors of the Devil's Brigade. We are in the dark places of the world. We free the oppressed. We sow chaos for our enemies, and we bring order and victory. To any adversary who would dare challenge us, the worst is yet to come. And the operators of Canadian and U.S. Special Operations Forces who put their lives on the line every day to secure our freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you, General Lipson. Now, I just have a few announcements. We'll retire the colors, and then there are a couple other activities going on post today's. To your right, to my left, Special Forces, today's Special Forces brought up a plethora of their equipment that they work with every day. We tried to get some of the 1942 kit here. We were unsuccessful in that, but just look at some of the equipment that they have, and you can see why they're the best of the best. Just to tell.
Join me, please. I wrote this in Afghanistan. I thought it might be appropriate for today. Go into the world to preserve peace. Remember the wisdom that you have learned and be courageous. Pursue excellence in all things. Cling to that which is good. Resist evil always. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Lift up the oppressed. Defend the helpless.
I also want to recognize command teams from 1st Special Forces Group, 3rd Special Forces Group, 5th Special Forces Group, and 19th Special Forces Group. And the soldiers that you saw jump today were from 10th Special Forces Group and CSOR. So thank you for attending. Go look at the static display, come over to the service club, hit the museum, and before you leave, thank a soldier. Go thank a soldier. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Bill.
We got to it.